Yo, it's Guido coming at you with the Tactics Talk. Welcome back, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, I've got an interesting one here. We're going to tread lightly to some extent, but we have Atragon here, and Atragon is one of the regulars on the forum. He actually posted this, and he posted the replay. So as he put it out for public consumption, I'm going to go ahead and do a video on it because I think it talks to a lot of really interesting things. And he basically asked, hey, what could I have done possibly to win this game? I had a good game. What could I have done? And it ends up being quite a high damage game. And I watched it, and it really kind of struck me the difference in a lot of people's play styles. But as I was looking at some of the comments on the forum, basically people talking about, all right, what was it that made him lose this game, or what was the contributing factors? It kind of came down to a couple small things, at least in my opinion, that were end game things. And it was boiled down to, in a couple people's opinion, to he had used his gold early, and he didn't have gold to pen a tank that required quite a bit of pen at the end, and that was, in essence, what caused him to lose. Well, I looked at that, and it strikes me really how few people really understand that before you get to the end of the game, there's a beginning of the game. There's a beginning of the game, and then there's a middle of the game, and every decision in between hitting battle, excuse me, and I've actually talked about it, every decision in the garage setting up your tank also counts. But let's just stick with the actual matches. Once you hit battle, every decision you make past there, positioning, repositioning, who you support, who you don't support, which tanks you choose to shoot in the position you're in, which tanks you choose not to shoot, how you operate your tank, the mechanics, the way you side scrape, where you go hold down, the whole gamut. All of it adds up to a result at the end. And if you look at a game and you go, wow, I lost, and I think I lost because I did X at the end, I think you're selling yourself short because you're not asking the right questions. The rest of the question is, what did I do before that, and before that, and before that? And I think it's most useful to go back to hitting battle and when you start analyzing what's going on in the game. So let's talk about this, because Atragon has a different playstyle than I do. Now, this is a sample of one. It's the only game of his I've ever watched. It's very possible this is the only game he's ever done this in, or the way he's played was the only time he played this way, in other words, was this time. I got that. It's a low sample size. But we'll talk about how it was played and what the effect of it was on this particular match. Now, whether it's his style or not, I don't know. He'd have to let us know. But I thought it was interesting because it's quite a different way than I would have gone about this. Now, of course, I had to look up his stats. This has nothing to do with stat shaming, and there wouldn't be any shame anyway because he's a pretty good player, knows what he's doing overall. But he is in his Conqueror tier 9, and he's top tier in 2-tier battle. This is a pretty good setup, actually, for a Conqueror. There's some really nice hold down spots over there on the west side in the factories. He does have some heavy hitters, 2 other Conquerors, very tough to get through the turrets of those things, a Type 4, which is not as big a problem as it used to be, but it's still a relatively big problem if he wants to fling a bunch of HE around. Then all that really nice Conqueror turret armor is going to be a little bit less useful. A couple big TDs like a Foch and a JT and a WT, and then some other smaller cats and dogs. All of which will have not too much trouble with his whole armor here and there, but will definitely be doing a lot of bouncing off his turret. And there's 1 artillery on each side. So when I looked at this, my initial thought was, all right, let's go down to the factory. So let's get started on this thing. There we go. And it looked like that's what he was doing. So he's headed down to the factory. So, of course, the big question that we'll continue to go back to was, what could I have done to win this game? What was it that caused us to lose it? However you want to look at it. So the first thing is positioning. In a game, you take a look at the enemy setup. You take a look at your own setup. And for me, my opinion, Atragon, you should have gone down to the factory. And that's what I thought you were doing, but you choose to go up on this hill, which was the first really interesting thing I saw you do, because I don't know if I have ever gone up on this hill. And it could be certainly a surprise, and if you can get back off of it, very interesting. Let's see what happens here, though, because he actually gets a shot right into the side of one of the Conquerors, and he's able to back out. He does get spotted, and there's 1 artillery, which doesn't seem to be paying too much attention to him. He's actually able to reload and come right up, and nobody has set up to shoot him. And then we cross across this open, and we're going to get away with this, but holy cow, man, this is definitely not what I would have done, especially stopping. Very surprised one of those Conquerors, or that Conqueror, or even the 100-01 didn't test the waters by coming around that corner with either a side scrape or going hold down with his turret and trying to take a poke at you. But Good news is you got away with it. So it looks like we're running a zoom out mod, so we got a mega zoom out, kind of looking around. And this was very interesting to me. I was kind of looking at this going, all right, so what are we doing? We've zoomed out completely, taken an interesting look around the battlefield, and now we're fading back over to the east side here. And I'm kind of wondering why. Now, it looks like there is a bit of a push going on in the east, so it's possible that he is reacting to that. Nice shot into the Ferdinand. Really nice accuracy on the Conqueror right there. It can pull off shots like that a lot of heavies really can't do, or will have a much lower PK. Looks like that guy is gone, so he shoots into where he was last spotted, and now we're going to truck on this way. And like I said, there is something going on over on the east side, but let's just pause it for a second and talk about this, because they're down 2-1, all right? So all is not lost, but they have lost a T-54 and a T-92, and it does look like the east side's getting pushed a little bit. But he's in a heavy tank, and we talked about the east side being a really good place to fight. For my money, when you are in a top-tier heavy tank, you go where the top-tier heavy tank can do the best or have the most impact. That doesn't mean you automatically go down to the factories. That, again, my opinion and how I play. And that's where I'm getting at this difference in play style potentially. For me, I would have been over there on the west side. Not automatically, because that's where, air quotes, heavy tanks go, but just because based on what I'm seeing on the setups in my tank, I'd feel like I'd have a really good chance of doing very well down there against them. And he's got some help. He's got the ST-1 went there. That's good. That's the other tier 9 heavy. The T-34, great hold down tank. The OHO, blapping hopefully some HE. And there's a TD in there as well. The T-30, which is essentially a heavy. So he's got a really good force. That's going to be force on force over there. And he's got a decent crew there in the middle, kind of keeping them honest in the middle as well with the tier 10 or the T10 tier 9 heavy. So let's stop just yapping about that for a second and watch him now. He's going to come over to this side. Zoomed out a lot, looking potentially to start working on the T-54 or any other tanks that may be trying to push in there. But if we look at that, on the east side, we say, okay, again, I'm going to pause it because there's a Sturv anchoring the backfield. There's a heavy and a medium that have moved up. Just as a side note, Wargaming, could you please make the names of anything that's in the 0 column here flop over to the left? Can we? Is that, how hard is that? It can't be. It can't be that hard. Anyway, there's plenty over here right now keeping these guys busy. So I don't really think it's a case of, holy cow, I need to flex over here because that flank is collapsing. For me, it's more a case of, hey, let me lend my power down here with these guys and start working on the dudes down low. So again, let's get going here and we'll see how this thing plays out. Ferdinand kind of wanders around in the open. Atragon gets a nice shot into him right there, covers up. I think for me, right there, I would have straightened out my tank instead of backing out, but it looks like the Ferdinand decided not to point at you, so perhaps you noticed that and just tried to get out there and get a shot. He goes into hiding there, and you don't have to take another shot. It does look like they have cleaned up the Suma over on the other side, the Suma SM. And Atragon's going to come in here and start working on these dudes. He's got 1,200 damage, and it looks like there's the standard across the alleyway brawl going on over on the east side, and his team evens it up to, well, not evens it up, he's actually down another tank, but brings it up to 2-3. This shot was crazy. He's guy going across, just nicely done. Little lead fire into the M41, puts a chunk out of him. Now we have the STA-1 cruising along. Takes a chunk out of that guy. Keeps on backing up. You do this a little bit the rest of the game too. You take a shot and just kind of back up automatically. I don't think you're in much danger right here. I might have just stayed there and get those nice zoom ins and just blap these guys. And then we sort of come off what's going on there. And this is another thing for me that I would critique a little bit about your game, and I think you missed maybe a shot on that other medium, is potentially not going for the throat in a couple cases where you've got these guys, T-54, M41 over here. We're going to back out of that, kind of leave those dudes alone, and now we're just going to flex over here and start working on the WT. Now, granted, you get a nice shot on them, but what's going on with the M41 and the T-54? So my question then is, what's the plan, right? What is the plan for Atragon to win this battle? Is the plan just to simply react over and over to shots that I have? You're doing a pretty good job of that. Or is the plan to look at the minimap and go, all right, where can I do my best work? Where can I help this team win? And for me, it was over there, again, on the west side, helping them where they're actually starting to win. This whole fight over in the field is slowly developing, and you've had an effect on it. But for the moment, it's not really decisive in this fight at all. So I'm going to come over here and actually find this Foch. I think we get a shot in him right here. That's nicely done right there. Tried to track him, I think. Put a chunk on him and then get out of the way. I would agree with that, because if the Foch gets spun around on you and unloads his autoloader, that's a big bummer. So now we're going to flow back here to the back end. And we find the Bulldog. I'm not sure really what his plan is, but he ends up bouncing. He bounces and bounces. I think I'd have just pulled out, put my front armor to him, and waited and zoomed in. It turns out you don't quite get a shot on him, but I don't think he was in much danger of pinning you. Nice shot right there. I was very surprised that hit, but it did. Unfortunately, it did not pin. And now we're going to back up. You can see that your guys over on the west side are doing a pretty good job. So I'm going to pause it one more time and talk about that just a little bit, because the game is about reducing the enemy hit points as fast as possible, with the secondary part of that being in the most important place for that match. For me, that would have been over on the west side. And you might say, all right, Guido, that you're full of it because the east side is falling and I'm over here stopping them. But the next question becomes, or what? All right, the or what is, if you had been down there on the west side with the rest of your heavies, probably that side's completely cleaned out. And by the time this little flank happens, you're able to come back out of the factories. Because the fact is, on this map, defending these caps from the factories is very easy. If they try to push across this open ground and get into the cap with these mediums and lighter and TDs and things, that it's not going to work. You're going to own them, especially if you own this part of the map. That's why this part of the map is so important. Yes, a great big push on the east side, sweeping through and coming around behind heavies that haven't cleaned up the guys in here can be deadly. But if they've cleaned up the enemy in here and you try to come around behind them, they can just fight out of these factories, and it's very easy to defeat that kind of push, especially if guys try to jump on cap. So let's keep going. Possibility of a shot on the Type 4. And here's my other issue with what you're doing here. You're really out in the open, and for some reason, they don't really get very organized in trying to come after you right here. There were a lot of opportunities, I think, to swarm you. The Sturv is backing you up. That is one of the things that's keeping them from doing it. And the T10 on the back edge there of the factory is also helping. But had they been serious about it and a little more organized, you might have been in trouble right here. But you are using this building well, and then, of course, the T-54 just loses his mind. He goes raging across, takes a shot in the side, nicely done. Takes another shot, and now he's down to a one shot to most of the guys you've got left. You do need to avoid getting out there in the open with the Foch. You're kind of trapped, to be quite honest, until you clean out the guys that are out in the field. If you tried to fade back, you'd be in trouble. Here comes the 110. I might have called him a T10 earlier, but he's the 110. Come out here, and he's going after the Sturv, I guess. T-54 sees you, kills your commander. That's a bummer. Now we're kind of fighting two directions. Good job using the train right there to stop him, and now the Foch, oh, holy cow, you're looked at from several different directions, but you're able to go ahead and not nuke that 110. He goes down. The Foch uses all his shots. It looks like he's trying to take down the Sturv, which he does, but now he's out of shots, and I thought this was a good idea right here. Even though the T-54 is there, get in there and get as many pieces of this Foch as possible. He gives a little too much of a corner there. Unfortunately, you're a little low and left and aren't able to do damage and track. So he's used one of his kits. This thing reloads so fast. It's so nice. Nice job. That was a really good shot right there. T-54 is probably trying to track you, but he ends up getting a shot, actually. Never mind. The Foch, I would have been a little more aggressive trying to get rid of. But you're going to back out. So discretion being the better part of valor. I don't know, man. I may have pushed in and tried to get rid of the Foch, but the danger there is the T-54 keeps popping out and taking chunks, and you're only about 3 shots from being done from that guy. And if he manages to track you, then you're really in trouble. So this may have been the better idea than going after the Foch right there. Anyway, that thing's a one-shot, so it's going to have to be careful how it tries to pop out and shoot you from now on. Notice your guys down in the factories are still alive. And again, I go back to, holy cow, had you been down there, I think this thing would have been over by now, because you'd have preserved a lot more hit points down there than you did really by hanging out in the field and fighting a bunch of guys who were trying to flank. It's just so hard on this one to flank. So we back up. This was a long backup. I'll be honest, I'm not really sure why you did it this way. I probably would have gone around to this side of the factory here and maybe side scraped out. See if you can't find the Foch being silly over here and look for that guy. I think you're right, though. I don't think you really can cross to the left right now based on where the 54 and the Foch is. You go start heading this way and they get into your side, you're in trouble. So, I mean, this is not a bad idea, but holy cow, there's the Foch. And right now, this is when I would charge forward. And there's the 54. Stop backing up, go straight at these guys because you need to start. Look, you're just about down to one tank down here now. So we're definitely in trouble. Either get in there and start kicking their rear or head back for some place to hide and be defensive on the cap. And we push out over here, and I'll tell you that this was not a decision I would have thought anybody would have made, but it ends up working out pretty decently. We're going to come out here, kind of exposing our side to potentially the Foch, but the Foch has fallen all the way back over there, and he's lit. And the poor T10 is over there alone. Now he goes in there basically alone as well, trying to take these guys on, and the only two tanks you have are now away from each other. He ends up killing the 100-01. That was good on him. And then he dies for it. The Foch is out in the middle. He dies here. Nicely done. And my problem with going out here is there's not a lot of ways to get away, and you're completely exposed to artillery right there. I think I would have definitely pushed in towards this factory area right here, and then potentially try to entice the T10 not to go kill himself. Already sees you. And now we're going to come over here and we're looking for the JT. We've got 4,736 damage. So just as a general thing, and we'll talk about the endgame stuff, because the endgame stuff is where the rest of the people who answered this thread kind of honed in on, saying that, well, you used your gold rounds early, so since you didn't have the gold rounds, you lost the game. But I'm looking at this going, I think your positioning put you in a bad position. And I think you fought really well where you were. Clearly, you've got 5,000 damage. But I'm going to be honest with you, I think a lot of that damage, at least early on, was kind of useless damage. Because it simply wasn't in the right place at the right time. I think if you'd have been over there with the rest of your big tanks, fighting where this thing would have had quite a good advantage, you would have preserved several of them and a good portion of their hit points by you being there and helping them win faster. That cleaning up all the guys you eventually shot in the middle would have been pretty easy because you'd have been with a bunch of your buds. And now we're just trying to fight these guys one-on-one. Did a pretty nice job here actually being sneaky. It surprised me a little bit that you didn't go right, but I didn't realize, and apparently you did, that he was obviously traveling away from you right here. I didn't realize that until you actually came around the corner and saw him. Now, the Type 4 has gone up, and he's going to take on the GW. He's a one-shot. I would have looked at that. Maybe you do. Whenever I get a light on someone like that and I'm not looking at them, I always swing the camera to take a look and just to see what I can gather. And I gather that he's down to a one-shot, and that's a good thing. And nicely done here. You actually knew that guy's back was to you. So there you go. There's something I didn't know at the time. This blew my mind that this thing actually hits you right here. Unfortunately, he does. You might have thought you were safe, but he nails you for 329. That took some of your options away, and that's a bummer. But what can you do? Artie sitting in the back, camping. It is what they do. So we've got an Artie and a near-dead Type 4. And to me, that has win written all over it, especially since I have the Type 4 stuck out in the open. And I was absolutely blown away that you did not either carve over to here and try to get a look at him, or maybe get down here and get into these buildings and try to get covered up from Artie and catch him trying to come back or move around out here. He's so massive. You should easily see this guy. And you headed over here. And this comes down to end game decision making and positioning. So I've already talked about the earlier positioning issues that I had with the way you did it. Hard to argue 5,428. So let's call it a draw on that, although I think you would have had more friends had you done it the other way. What do you do from here? Man, disengaging and letting that Type 4 do whatever he wanted to do, I would never, ever would have let him do that. You can easily pen a Type 4 with this thing. This thing has amazing penetration for its regular round at 259. There are multiple spots of, it's a Type 4, so I want to say it's 240 on the weak spots, the two hatch things. the little cheek piece right there. Potentially you could pin as well. But we go to cap. And my problem with this is now everyone and their mother knows where you are. Right? You've just let them all know. You're jumping on cap, and to me, you haven't set the conditions to cap. This is going to be a glove save kind of cap. It's possible. Let's see what actually happens right here. It's possible. The Type 4 is slow, but I would have expected the artillery to nail me pretty easily, guessing where I would be right here. But it looks like he's waiting for the Type 4. So we come in here. I'm looking at this going, okay, 126 on the enemy base capture. 237 left in the game. This should be sorted out. So we back up, and I'm like, no, stop backing, stop going off the cap. And this actually flummoxed me, to be quite honest, man. It's sort of inexplicable to me that you come in here and you adjust and you're fine, and then you went off. I'm thinking, what on earth? You had it. You did. I mean, you were there. You got away with it a couple times, and then you backed up again, trying to adjust in there. And now we've got a serious problem because we've just let the slowest tank known to man, other than perhaps the TOG, we've just given him the extra time he needs to get in here. Now, I didn't look at what the timer was on or how much time it takes for him to show up, but man, it was a lot further now than it was. So before our friend shows up and we start fighting this guy, two things much better than this would have been go after the Type 4 and kill him, and then track down Artie at your leisure. Or if you felt you knew Artie was in the corner, go after Artie. The problem with going after Artie is you didn't have a lot of time, and while it is not a very I'm sorry, I was thinking it was the GW on your side. It's not. It's a very mobile Lorraine. So extra problem trying to go after the Lorraine. He could already be over here on your side, for all you know. So probably not worth going up here and looking. I'd have definitely gone after the Type 4 and then headed to cap. Maybe I find the Lorraine or I force him out. All right, so you get some good SA from your buddies. They tell you that the Type 4 is at 11%. We saw him at 201 hit points. That's a one-shot to you. Another thing to think about is potentially just loading HE. Trying to go after a weak spot. 2 shots from HE would probably finish him off. All right, so here he comes, and he actually, unfortunately, is behind some boxes and things. So he's got you spotted. Frankly, there is no way you don't get reset from the artillery. For me, I'd just go after this dude and try to get rid of him. So we kind of hang out right here, and there it is. I mean, you had to know that was going to happen. The good news is you actually didn't do any damage. And remember, this is a 155-51. They don't actually do much damage. So we knock down some boxes. A little rocking back and forth. Kind of looking at this guy, kind of deciding what to do. And we shoot him through some boxes. Holy cow, man. Now remember, his weak spots, if I can get zoomed in here, try to get some of this, there we go. So those hatch dudes right there, I want to say it's that one as well, and then holy cow, he gave you that nice flat-plated cheek. And this is a pretty accurate gun. That is also a weak spot up top, but it's rounded. It's harder to hit than it really looks, especially at this range. Speaking of range, one option you had here was to just blast at him. As soon as the 155-51 fired the first time, go straight at him. Get closer. Get close to a weak spot, even get beside him, depending on when he starts to shoot at you. We go after a weak spot, but we've got HE loaded. Oh, geez. So we only take 47 out of that guy. Lorraine hits us for a little bit more, and now we're in big trouble. And I think you kind of realize here that the jig is up, and you're just going to have to go for it. Another shot right into his turret, but this time with, I think, HE as well, and the well-armored turret, and then we just kind of go at him. And what's pretty cool here is I think he actually switches, or never went after you with HE. He actually shoots AP here, potentially. It looks like he's got the smaller gun on, doesn't he? So there you go. And, oh, the artillery ends up finishing you off right there. Now, yes, had you had a couple APCR rounds, a couple gold rounds, that probably would have turned into at least a dead Type 4. I don't know if it would have turned into a win, because I didn't see where you were on the timer when they started showing up. So you got reset. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure you would have got through it. You would have been 2 more shots. The 155-51 would have probably been close to reloading, and he may have reset you again right there. So even with 2 gold rounds, I don't know if that was an automatic win. I think this one very clearly goes back to the very beginning. And it's like I talked about at the first of this. It's not the way I play. I'm not saying it's the way you play either, potentially. But it is an interesting example of two different ways of thinking about it right there. Yeah, you gathered up 5,475 damage, 389 assists. And I know I use the word useless damage. It's probably not the most appropriate, but let's call it damage at the wrong time in the wrong place. And again, I'm going back to it. I think you're really your biggest problem on this was not being on the west side helping your heavies win. Because had you been down there helping them win with that great damage, clearly you know the weak spots, you know side scraping, you have a good idea of timing and all that. Had you been down there wrecking face with your heavies, more heavies would be alive. And by the time you got to this point, there'd be 3 of you, 2 or 3 or 4 of you alive. And then it's easy tracking down these dudes, no problem. Maybe that Type 4 isn't even a problem because you've killed them long before. All right, man. I hope this is all kosher with you. This was thrown out into the public arena, so that's why I've done the analysis on it. And I just thought it was a really interesting way to look at it. And I wanted to address, to some extent, people who look at replays and go, well, at the end of it, I should have done X and I would have won. Well, okay, that's valid. You can look at that and talk about it, but why were you in that situation at the end? Were there things you could do before then that mattered? I think that's a lot more important to learning how to be better at this game than trying to figure out how I might have just fixed this one end game thing. That's good. Learn how to do that, but you know what? An honest assessment of everything that happened before then is probably a lot more valuable. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in. I hope you found that interesting. Let me know where I'm wrong down below. If you like what you saw or you learned something, make sure you subscribe, and we will see you.